What's up, Navigating Academia? This is your buddy Dr. J. Phoenix Singh here, bringing you another answer to a valued viewer question. You guys know that I love you, everybody who is already here in the squad of Navigating Academia, and if this is your first time joining us, please, if you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. We are a very fast-growing channel, and we would love to be able to have you here with us. We post new content every single week. I have been blown away by your guys' support in terms of my answers to your questions, so please do keep them coming. Make sure that if you have questions that are really specific to you, that you book a one-on-one paid session with me so that we can really go through it. I work with students from all over the world at every conceivable level, whether it is to get into graduate school, to be able to secure a postdoctoral position, to be able to really thrive, get grants, get publications as an early career professional. You name it, I've done it. I'm here for you guys at all times. So what I'll do for today is to be able to read the question, which is on my screen right now. It's a very sensitive question, and I want you guys to join me in giving kudos and props to the young man who asked this question, because it's one that I think a lot of people don't think about, and in today's culture, it's one that's really important to grasp and to grapple with. So let's go ahead and read it, and then I'll give you guys my perspective on it, okay? So right here on my screen, give me a sec. Okay, hi Dr. Singh, I'm applying to several Sci-D clinical psych programs this year, and I noticed that many are emphasizing the importance of cultural diversity, which I think is great and necessary for the field. I, however, belong to all majority demographic groups: white, cisgender, male, etc. If asked what I would contribute to a program from a multicultural standpoint, what would be an appropriate response in this case, besides that I would focus heavily on building cultural confidence? Well, competence, I'm sure. Whoa, respect. What a great question. This is something that for me, you guys know me, so I've got like every potential in-group and out-group mix. So my mother is Caucasian, so she's white, she's German and British. My father is first-generation immigrant from India. I used to be very overweight. Now I'm relatively physically fit. I've lived in 6 different countries on 3 different continents. Every place that I've lived, other than 2, has had an English where the native tongue was, has had a native language where the tongue was not English, so that was really rough depending on where I lived. It was a situation where I grew up relatively middle class, and then all of a sudden we moved to this really upper class area where I used to be the lightest skinned kid in my school, and all of a sudden I became like the darkest skinned kid in the county. So this is a situation where I definitely feel where you're coming from. And I feel like a lot of people are afraid of almost being penalized for being a member of a majority group these days. So I have a whole bunch of points that I want to make for you today that hopefully are going to assist you with your graduate school applications or your postdoctoral fellowship applications. I remember when I applied to grad school, which seems like yesterday, but it was a while ago. It was like over a decade ago. And when I initially did, I remember doing something, and it was called the Dove Statement. And I forget what it meant. It was like diversity, value, something, I have no idea. But I remember that it was something that was really important to be able to do, and still it's really important to be able to talk about building cultural competence exactly like you say. So here's the thing. I remember when I wrote it up, it was a lot easier for me because I had all these different cultural experiences. You know, having the Indian side of the family, having the German and British side of the family. I remember when I was an undergraduate at Tufts University, I was part of TASA, which was Tufts Association of South Asians. So shout out to TASA if there's any, Bhangra fans out there. We're in this together. So let me tell you guys, if you are not a member of a minority group though, this can be not frustrating necessarily, but it can definitely be a situation where it can be kind of scary because it's like, how can you kind of stand out in that regard? So here are my recommendations to you, okay? And I have a few, and I've taken notes here on the screen, so I'm looking down a little bit. That's the reason why, okay? So I want you to take a structured strategy here. As you guys know, I'm a very algorithmic person, so I believe that if you do something that has a clear narrative and a clear story to it, then that is always the best approach because you're going to be able to explain it in a logical manner. Remember that verbal communication, written communication, in this case, the likelihood is you're going to be writing your application, but you may have an interview down the line, is basically something that is going to assist you with your thinking and vice versa. Everything is going to be structured together, all right? So this is the algorithmic approach that I think that you should take. First thing I think you should do, because it is the number one methodology these days when it comes to identifying implicit bias, is to be able to take an IAT. An IAT is an implicit association task or an implicit association test. You can take them via Project Implicit, via Harvard. If you literally go to Google or any search engine, type in Project Implicit and Harvard, they have dozens and dozens of these IATs. The idea behind a classic implicit association test is that you are, and it's never going to be like publicly published. It's not like everybody's going to be like, hey, Josh has X, Y, and Z automatic preferences, so let's all go after Josh. There's nothing like that. This is all for kind of your personal knowledge. Think about it almost like taking a personality test, like a Myers-Briggs test, or which Disney princess am I? I have no idea. Probably Jasmine. Not sure why. So, but this is one of these situations where I think that doing this is very important for all of us to be able to understand the biases that we don't realize that we have. There is a very well-known cognitive bias which essentially suggests that we all believe that we are unbiased or less biased than other people, and that we are significantly better than others at identifying bias in others. We call this the bias blind spot, and it is total BS, all right? It's a form of bias in and of itself. So it's important that we not be afraid of identifying what our biases are, because remember that bias is not necessarily a bad thing. And you may hear that and be like, Sing, what the hell are you talking about? Well, I've spent my life in terms of academia focusing on risk. And when I hear risk, I think of risk of something bad. I think about the risk of cancer. I think about the risk of AIDS. I think about the risk of violence, which is what I research. But the thing is that risk is originally conceptualized back in the mid 1600s. Basically what it focused on is the probability of gain or loss at like the throw of the dice or the turn of a card. It was a gambling thing. So this is something where risk is not necessarily negative, but we always think about it as being something negative because we're conditioned based on, how the media portrays it, what we read in books, etc. Same with bias. Bias itself is something that, and implicit bias in particular, is something that has helped us survive for literally hundreds of thousands of years as Homo sapiens, as a species. But the thing is that it really does, in some cases, impair our ability to make judgments in a completely objective way. Like I said, this has helped keep us alive, but in this day and age, it's something that can get us into a lot of very precarious situations, and it can produce outcomes that are subpar because of the lack of diversity that they end up creating because of this in-group bias. We prefer people who look like us, who talk like us, who have a lot of things that are in common with us. And so it's important that we kind of overcome these things. So, at the end of the day, taking implicit association tests, number one, you shouldn't be afraid of them. Number two, when you take them, they're not going to say, ha, I knew it. Josh is a racist, or Josh is a misogynist, or Josh is homophobic, or Josh is xenophobic. Anything that makes you an ist, or anything involved with an ism, race-ism, sex-ism, the IAT does not measure those. What it does measure, though, is automatic preferences for certain groups over others. And essentially what it does is attempt to measure how accurately what your response is matches up with the stereotype on any number of different phenomena. So I recommend taking a series of IATs and identifying what your implicit biases are. That's number one. Remember, if we can identify it, if we can measure it, we can manage it. So that's number one. Don't be afraid of that. And I would say that in this day and age, there is so much going on here, and this is being recorded in 2020, and here in the United States, and internationally, really, there is so much greater awareness of certain phenomena, like, for example, in the criminal justice system. Oh my gosh. You want to talk about racial disparities? Look at the criminal justice system. You want to talk about mental health disparities? The largest provider of mental health care services in the United States is the correctional system, right? Like, that's it. So which just blows my mind. So over 1 in 20 Americans is currently involved in the justice system, or has been in the past, in some way, shape, or form. And mostly this is probation and parole, keep in mind, for, minor offenses. But it's just absolutely wild. It's like, how on earth is that even possible? But it actually is. This is all I've been doing for the last 10, 15 years, right? So here's the deal. Figure it out, right? That's number one. Find what those biases are. You can read a meta-analysis. The best one that I know of is Forscher and colleagues in JPSP, which was published back, I think, in 2019, could have been 2018, where they ended up finding over 400 studies with evidence that debiasing does work. Now, the problem is that those studies, over 80% of them were on college students, and over 80% of them were not longitudinal in nature. They did not follow people after a debiasing training or intervention was put into place. It definitely doesn't work to use something like, if we just stop talking about X, then, it wouldn't exist anymore. Or, but my best friend is such and such member of such and such group. That doesn't work, right? Like, that's not evidence-based at all. But there's a lot of evidence-based stuff that does work. Things like forced distancing, which is where, like when you're making decisions, you use the pronoun you instead of the word I to be able to forcibly distance yourself and your ego from a decision-making phenomenon. Anchoring, where you learn local base rates of certain, phenomena before making a decision. Commitment to pre-commitment to criteria. There's so much stuff that's out there that's evidence-based. I recommend taking a look at that literature. The only reason I know about this, by the way, is not because I'm some genius. It's because I read about it, right? I read the peer-reviewed research literature, and that means if I can do it, you can do it too. Spend that time doing it and document your journey. The thing is that these days there are these books out there. Like there's a book that like a lot of people in my church are reading called White Fragility. And I think that a lot of these books, what they do is they kind of make you feel guilty. They make you feel guilty for being a member of a majority group, as if you should be ashamed of yourself. And I do not believe that. I fundamentally do not believe that. And it's like, how could I? I'm a member of every minority and every majority group combined, apparently, in terms of my racial background, my ethnic background, everything. So this is just one of those situations where you should not feel overly defensive or so overly defensive that you don't want to explore these things, or even worse, that you deny their existence, because I can tell you that that is total nonsense, because the stuff does exist. So take an IAT. Identify the outgroups that you do not have automatic preferences for. I'm not saying that you have preferences against them in some like terrible way, but you don't have automatic preferences for them. And usually we have automatic preferences for individuals who are male or men, sex-wise, cisgendered, heterosexual. We're looking at individuals who are Christian, individuals who are rich, individuals who are able-bodied, individuals who are mentally healthy, all these different groups, okay? And by the way, if you have an automatic preference for individuals who, let's just say, are thin and Christian and rich and whatever else, it doesn't make you a terrible person. It makes you a human being, okay? And that's an important thing to recognize, all right? So there you go. The next thing that I would do is, once you kind of identify those groups, I want you to start reading. Read the peer-reviewed literature specifically in your area of interest. Like, I'm a violence risk assessment guy. One of my best buddies in the field is named Steph Shepard, brilliant researcher in Australia. Shout out to Steph if you're watching. And I can tell you right now that Steph's work when it comes to cultural sensitivity and the cross-cultural use of violence risk assessment methods has just like blown away the field. His work is absolutely brilliant and very... It's a little bit controversial, I can say, but at the same time, it's really influential. So read within your field, whatever your phenomenon is, your clinical phenomenon, whatever your method of choice is when it comes to research. So like, I'm a meta-analysis, systematic review, survey guy, right? Like, that's just what I'm interested in. And whatever your general kind of field is, forensic psych, social psych, whatever it is, get acquainted with that literature. That's super important, okay? The next thing to do is to be able to read some good books. And when I say good books, I mean books by like legitimate authors and not books that are trying to like blame and shame and this kind of stuff. So if I'm going to recommend two to you, one of them is called Blind Spot, right? And this is by Professors Banaji and Greenwald, who developed the implicit association test. Most important thing I want you to know about the IAT is that not only is it not perfect, we do not have any causal evidence to suggest that just because you debias somebody's prejudices, so like their attitudes, we don't have any causal evidence to suggest that that actually impacts your behavior. So we can debias you from that one perspective, but on the other perspective, in terms of actions, we're not quite sure yet. So, I mean, the field's working on that. It's really important stuff. Second one, love of my life, Jennifer Aberhart, right? Who's literally a genius and also won the MacArthur Genius Grant, right? So this book is called Bias. It's very a personal account of hers. I had the pleasure of meeting Jennifer over 10 years ago, maybe like 15 years ago now, and her career has just exploded. She's a brilliant woman, and at the same time, her work is very, very influential. when I was an undergrad, I had the pleasure at Tufts of working with Nalini Ambady. If you've read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, you're very familiar with a lot of her thin slice research, and she was so brilliant, and she was very close with Jennifer, and that's the reason I had the pleasure of meeting her. That was really cool. So start doing your reading, but do legit reading. Don't do reading on kind of like, again, stuff blaming and shaming and this kind of nonsense. I give implicit bias trainings all over the world. If you guys are interested in hiring somebody who's a good implicit bias trainer, I'm tooting my own horn here. I think I'm pretty good. So definitely, if you're interested, definitely hire me, because I come in with a super evidence-based knowledge, not because I've been doing this forever, but because I literally got heavy into this field 2019, so last year, and then everything, like the world exploded this year. And so because of that, I ended up getting really passionate about it, okay? Read all this literature. If you can have practical experiences then, right, with the outgroups that you do not have an automatic preference for, that's what you need to start doing. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's probably going to feel like something you don't want to do, but it is something that is healthy for you. And remember, I believe in 7 kinds of optimization. Physical optimization, mental health optimization. I believe in your optimization spiritually, financially, educationally, and occupationally, and socially in terms of your family, socially in terms of romance, and socially in terms of platonic friendship relationships, right? That's what I believe in, and this fits squarely into virtually all of them, right? Because of the way that our brain works, it's going to influence everything in our life. So that's my recommendation. Travel, live abroad like I did, volunteer with individuals who are less financially fortunate than yourself. Get in there and actually try to make a difference. All of us have things that we'd all rather Netflix and chill and just sit around. Trust me, I get it. I am like several seasons of Better Call Saul behind. I'd probably rather be doing that than something that makes me uncomfortable. But it's really important to do. It does show evidence of debiasing. But if you just do it one time, it doesn't really mean a lot. You got to keep on this thing, all right? This journey that you're going to go through by doing this is what you can talk about in your personal statement. Talk about the literature that you read. Talk about taking this journey. Talk about even being nervous to write that statement or to be asked that interview question. That makes you human. That's genuine. And I can tell you that that sense of genuineness really comes across. That authenticity really comes across. And I can tell you, as somebody who's a grad school supervisor myself, it's something that I really respect. I really respect you for it. So again, thank you for the question. Subscribe to the channel. For the love of God, take every link on this channel and post it to your social media account. Doesn't cost you anything to like the video, so make sure to do that as well. And I will see you next time. Keep the questions coming. Peace.